After you.
Oh, hi. Hello. My name is Liseli and I work in sports marketing. I probably have one of the best jobs in the world in that I spend all day talking about sport, selling sport, and getting to revel in my geekiness and love of sport, but without actually having to do the hard work of doing it and being an athlete. So I think I sit in a really great place. So yeah, I'm currently working at Sky Sports, which is a big European sports broadcaster as head of marketing here. So yeah, enjoying the ride with both its highs and its lows.
So, hi, my name's Issa. I'm an England and Great Britain beach volleyball athlete. I've been taking part in beach volleyball for probably around 10 years now, I want to say, maybe a little bit longer, 11. And in my sport, I've come across a lot of highs, lows you do a sport, but I've also been fortunate enough to win a couple of British championships, multiple
Casual,
Grand Slam
casual, casual,
events.
casual drop in there. Whilst Lizelle's watching them at
Just a
work,
few.
Issa's winning them. Love it.
Just a few Grand Slams here and there. So it's been a good start to my career, I would say. But like everything, I'm hungry always for more. That's my biggest thing as an athlete. I'm hungry for more to excel, but I also have that mindset of, I didn't see many athletes like me when I was younger. So I've always wanted to kind of set the standard and try and be the guy who motivates another kid who's like me, maybe to go on and be even better than I was. So that's kind of like my big thing with being an athlete. I love playing the sport, but I also want to kind of leave a legacy with my sport and my name as well.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And just actually, I was curious, obviously when we got the introduction, what is it that made you choose like beach volleyball specifically? Because obviously it's a fun game and it's one that has a lot of great cultural attractions in a lot of European countries, for example, but not necessarily here in your home country of the UK. So like, what was the thing that you thought to yourself when you saw it? What was your inspiration point? Because obviously for a lot of young Black boys and girls, it'll be seeing you flying the flag, doing so well. But what was your sort of spark that got you to want to do it?
Oh man, so for me, I mean, I started off playing indoor volleyball, and then it was just in the summertime. The coaches wanted me to play a bit of beach, just to keep in shape, keep healthy over the summer, and continue progressing my game. Just more focusing on improving my skills for the indoors, and then something to do with just being on the beach in the
Yeah.
sun, playing, my friends being around as well. Like a lot of players tend to have friends who also play the sport, so just being around them, that kind of sparked me to want to keep doing it. Of course, finding it's great finding some early success. Like in my very first year, I
Mm-hmm.
won the junior national beach champs, and all of a sudden I was like on the radar for like junior national team coaches.
Yeah.
But for me, it was always just having fun and enjoying it. That kind of sparked the whole, oh, I would love to play this each summer. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden I had my international call up, and then it was like, oh wow, there's a lot of like good European teams. I would love
Yeah.
to maybe keep doing this.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was kind
That's
of how it
cool.
was for me.
Yeah. It's
And
nice.
how
Yeah, it's
oh
nice that
God.
you discovered it through fun, right? Because often a
Yeah.
lot of athletes, when they come into the journey of sport, it's through sort of like they start off with the fun, but then maybe it gets competitive or very serious with the high pressure. And especially when you are one of few in this space doing the sport, we all know the great stories of the Serena Williams and the Venus Williams and Tiger Woods going to occupy sports that are very synonymous as well with a lot of, let's say, a lot of white social culture. I
Yeah.
think as well. So having that, and I think for me, with the family influence from Brazil, obviously beach volleyball is very different there, as you know,
Yeah.
from having spent the winter there last year. It is the game that everybody plays just because you're at the beach all the time and the weather allows for it. So it's great that you
Exactly.
got that spirit from indoor volleyball to the outside and with fun at its core. I think that's awesome.
No, for sure. And I mean, don't get me wrong, there's definitely some difficult times where, the competitive side, that nature. But I think
Mm,
the biggest thing, our coaches remind us to kind of be in the moment. But I
yeah,
think also the biggest thing is my family, my network, my support. If I win or I lose, my mom always says like the same stuff. Like, she'll always message me before a tournament, like, saying like, God willing that you are successful, you don't have any injuries. But then if even if we lose a tournament or we don't do well, she'll always be like, make sure you're still enjoying it, you're having fun, because not everybody gets to do what you get to do. And and those things keep me grounded to focus on that type of stuff, on just enjoying it. And I've also always had the mindset of, as soon as I stop enjoying it and having fun, then I kind of look at, why am I still doing it? So it's
Yeah.
one of those big things for sure.
Does the competitor in you not want to keep you grounded to doing it though, even when it gets a little bit harder and the enjoyment phases out? Like when your team and you hit a tricky patch of form, how do you keep that like that joy, let's say, in what you're
Um,
doing?
for me, it's a bit different, because I I find a lot of joy in the stuff that sometimes people don't enjoy. Like, there are a lot of players who don't enjoy going to the gym.
Yeah.
They just enjoy, like, and I find enjoyment in the gym because it's just
Okay.
me, the weights, my headphones, like
Yeah.
my music.
Yeah.
And I guess it's the other aspects around
Just
playing. If it's not
playing.
going
Yeah.
so well, then I'll be like, okay, today I had a really good day in the gym, or today, like, I really like was like mentally just focused on trying to make each thing a bit better. Like, even if there wasn't a good run of form, or we had some bad results. Like, even recently, our event in Brazil in Itapema, we lost a tough game
Mhm.
against Argentina. It was a close 3-set match.
Yeah.
And for us, it's very easy to be like, oh, it was a loss. But it was also like, considering some of the circumstances, with slight injury at the moment, playing against a veteran, competed at the Olympic Games,
Yeah.
some great athletes.
Darn,
It's
has
kind of
standard.
where it's,
Yeah.
yeah, the high standard of where we want to be, considering we're still a very young team.
Yeah.
We then could look at it and be like, you know what, we did really well, and we're gonna go home, get our stuff together, start preparing, and then really have another push in the middle part of the year. So
Yeah.
it's always just trying to remember these types of things, I guess, that helps keep you like
Grounded.
grounded and motivated a bit more as well.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That's cool. Where's your next tournament? Where you headed to next?
Um, so our next tournament
Yeah.
is one of two potentially. So maybe we might be competing in Turkey, and
Okay.
then depending on how my foot is, if we decide to not compete there, we have at the end of May the Commonwealth Games qualification tournament
Yeah.
between the English teams. So that will be in London
Yeah.
on our home court. So
Great.
I'm excited for that for sure.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you about the Commonwealth Games. How are you feeling about it? Obviously, because when a big event like that comes to your home country and there's this moment of bittersweet pride, right? As an athlete, like, will you get to take part in it? And is
Yeah.
a part of you maybe, you want to definitely be there representing on the podium. So how do you balance that feeling? And especially when you've got an injury, because the window's getting tighter and tighter, right? For you to get fitter for it.
Exactly. It's I trust the people around us, to kind of get me in the best possible shape mentally, physically for it.
Mhm.
I think the biggest thing is, especially with the home games, there's so much buzz around the home games for
Yeah.
sure, because
Yeah.
you have a chance to have family and friends and everybody there, hopefully supporting, and the whole nation backing you.
Yeah.
People who've never seen the game will be there screaming with a beer in their hand, probably. So that would be awesome to have, because we don't have many events in the UK. I think the last major one was the Olympics in
I was going
2012
to say
for with
2012.
beach volleyball. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Great crowds for
so
that as well. Really, really great crowds for that. I remember
yeah,
watching it on TV. So it was so nice to see a sport that doesn't normally get a prime time audience get that opportunity. And I think that's what I love about working in sports media, because you do get a chance to introduce audiences to new sports and give them new heroes to cheer for, especially around big national moments and events like that. It's so wonderful
well,
to get
exactly. And that's something I actually wanted to ask you about was, with the work that you get to do and all the sports you kind of get to be around,
to.
like, what are some of the key things that you enjoy most about it? Because I mean, there can be so many, but there must be a few, especially being in the position that you're in with so many sports. Is
Yeah.
like, do you kind of enjoy the smaller sports that are more niche, or do you prefer working around some of the bigger events where it might be a football World Cup or
Yeah, so I've been lucky enough to get to do the full range, I guess, now. When I look at it, also tells you how old I am now, but less on that. But I think what I really like actually are the human stories around sports. Like, if I think back to why I got involved in sport in the first place, is because I was taking part in sports at school whilst living in South Africa at the time. We'd moved there as a family, and I was attending school that was just feeling that still very much working out that South Africa was no longer living in apartheid. It was Nelson Mandela's first term as president of South Africa. And so you were looking at a odd backdrop, and the school had been exclusively white that my sisters and I were now attending, and we were good at sports, right? But the school didn't want us to represent them externally because they still hadn't changed a lot of policy around that sort of thing. So we had this kind of jarring relationship with sport where we loved it, we loved taking part in it, but we weren't allowed to explore it to our full and to get to that level where we could, properly show our potential. And we had to fight quite a lot, and my parents did. So I eventually was able to start representing the school, and I got a lot of joy from that, and I loved it. But then eventually, you kind of have the hard talk with yourself to say, will I ever reach the dizzying heights like you to be able to win MVPs and championships? And once the answer was no, it was like, how could I still get involved in sport? And it was around about the time I was, having those difficult times with being able to access and feel the full benefit of sport and its power. The Williams sisters were, starting to make real tracks on the tennis circuit. And it was just before Serena Williams won her first Grand Slam, the US Open 1990. And I begged my parents to stay up to watch it because I was convinced she was going to win. And I didn't want to miss history. And I think there was something about the power of that moment, being able to witness her triumph against all odds and seeing somebody who was often looks like be denied to take up space in the moment, get the moment, and then get to excel in the highest level in front of her home crowd, And I think seeing the power of that human story and how pivotal it was for me at that young age and also for other people, I thought to myself, how great could it be if I was somehow able to affect making sure that the next Serena Williams didn't have as difficult time, so they could be more of those coming to the fore across all different sports. And how do you then use their stories and their human impact and inspiration to innovate sports and get them in front of other audiences, and also to challenge audience perceptions around culture and around where identities are and are not represented. So something, as time went along, I thought, okay, well, I want to work with athletes because I think they're awesome. I use their human stories, and then I want to work in sports. So today, whenever I'm looking at opportunities for where I want to go and work in marketing, I always think to myself, how can I combine those three ingredients, the power of the human story that resonates beyond borders, countries, and nationalities, in order to change or challenge a perception on a big platform, and then also help elevate the sport or progress the sport. And I think that's where the breadth of the type of sports we work on allows you to do that like really well when you're a media broadcaster. But it also means that sometimes you're confronted with harder decisions about where your audience are. Like if you look at some really traditional sports broadcasters over the years, including the one I work at Sky Sports, they've really been built for a very specific audience over time, mostly middle-aged, white, well-to-do man. And that's ironic because when you then tune in and you watch the programming, to your point, you watch this huge diversity of sport where you see people represented from all walks of life, but the actual customer we talk to and we build the brands for in sports media for too long have only been one particular section. So now there's actually a really powerful opportunity to say they know the human power stories because they watch them week in, week out. They love the product. They're curious and want to learn more about sport because that's the thing. How do you actually start to think about sport more like entertainment? And then entertainment's biggest role, if you think about society, if you think about how movies and music and TV series have helped society over time, they've not sat in their laurels. I think this is something really great that actually I've seen, with all its faults, Hollywood do really well over the years. It's not reflected its audience in its prejudices and its small-mindedness. It's actually looked intentionally, especially with new streaming services coming to the fore, with how they're commissioning to progress its audience and to challenge its audience by making content that shines a light on people who don't often get a spotlight. And I think sport needs to be brave in the same way and start to do that. So that's what I love, because And often it's easier to do that with a niche sport because people feel less emotional about it and feel like they can take more risks, you can experiment more.
Yeah.
And I think with women's sport, I've had, really good opportunities to do that before in my role at the Zone before I joined Sky Sports, with the UEFA Women's Champions League going on YouTube, and really looking at how could we use YouTube as a platform to serve a very underserved audience and fans of women's football who would traditionally not get that level of production, that level of investment and marketing.
Interesting you say that, because I mean, like, especially you were talking about with women's sport, I personally have 3 younger sisters. All of them competed in or took part in sport. My youngest sister right now is crazy about football, and I'm hoping to try and organize an opportunity for her, because she's an Arsenal football fan. Unfortunately, I'm a Chelsea fan, so
I know.
I'm a
We
bit
should
like,
be watching the game soon. Is that Tosin? Yeah, Tosin has probably set me up today. She's put me on a call with a Chelsea fan who's an athlete who's won championships that I would have wanted to win. I have been as good as an athlete. I feel like this is a proper stitch up.
Maybe I don't know.
It's like, is this a Chelsea fan club? Have I inadvertently joined?
Potentially. I mean, we'll see. You might be celebrating at the end of the night, but I mean, I don't want to say you will.
Highly doubt it. I highly doubt it.
Yeah.
I highly doubt it. If there's something you accept as an Arsenal fan, at least those of us that live with the Premier League table, is that you're unlikely to be. But thank you for the thought.
Okay. Well, but I mean, so currently, especially like back to my younger sister playing football, I've been lucky enough through sport and through different scenarios to have met other athletes in different walks of life. When I was a bit younger, I was taking part in like a youth sports trust scheme, and I ended up meeting and still connect with regularly a friend of mine, Lotta Wubben-Moy, who plays for Arsenal Ladies.
She's awesome. Yeah. I love her.
I love the way that she tries to promote that so much.
Yeah.
She wants to push and promote that message of women's football and a lot about it as well. And I'm hoping at some point I can take my sister to meet her and watch her play, because for her, growing up wanting to play football at the moment, I know she's 14, but she loves it. She's crazy about it. She plays it in school. It would be awesome for her to see somebody doing it at that level, at the highest level, in the women's game.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. I love like the fact that this is something that you want to push, and like you say, with more niche sports, you have the opportunity to change that picture, that culture, and then it's our job as athletes, I guess, to kind of grow that sport to become more in the limelight, in the front light, or in the front stage, and then hopefully the public kind of just see it as, oh, it's normal. There's a young Black male playing there or a Black female playing there, and these are the players who we support, who we want to rally around. And it's not seen as not so much strange, but
not anomaly, not something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a one-off, I know, or the minority, the exceptional minority, because I think sport has also been seduced a little bit too much by that narrative. It makes great Hollywood films to think about stories like the Williams sisters, like Tiger Woods, but actually when you look at it, it's quite shocking that both golf and tennis haven't managed to find a huge consistent pool of talent from underrepresented minorities when you consider the significant commercial pool those athletes have. And also thinking about the golf like ecosystem itself, like how is it enabling opportunities for people from less privileged backgrounds to play the sport, because when you do that, you open up a more diverse pool. Tennis is starting to catch up a bit on that, but it has been late to the game. But some of the things, without giving too much away, that I think the power and what's exciting about places that I choose to work is that they can affect that through how they structure their commercial engagement with those rights holders to incentivize them to create great ecosystems for your younger sister. I think one of the things that I feel really passionately about, and I think people don't pay attention to enough, is that whilst we're in this really great growth trajectory for women's football and it's getting bigger, better exposure, when you look around an Arsenal team and, top women's team here in the WSL, but when you look all across, there's actually not that much racial diversity in the starting team. And then when you look at where Arsenal is in terms of its neighborhood and its community, that's odd to me. Are you trying to say none of the girls when you consider the kind of areas, Highbury, Islington, where the training ground is, that's predominantly communities where there's Black mixed populations and
Should
Southeast
be.
Asian populations. So how come none of those girls are being graduated into the academy, but we're
Yeah.
managing to get great players from the
All over.
from all over Europe, right? And so
Yeah.
I think it is a conscious problem that women's football, again, because it's in a really great growth phase, can catch now, but it has to catch it now before it then starts to become almost the norm that only a certain type of woman plays football, and then other sports then almost become it will be bitterly ironic for me if women's football reaches its absolute height and is an excluding sport, when the whole foundations of women's football was to challenge the exclusion that sadly
Yeah.
the men's game has brought in lots of different facets. So I think that's something we have to, all of us, kind of take stewardship of, who have an affection of the game. And I think some of the schemes that Arsenal Football Club are putting in place to try and address that as an issue, I think is encouraging, but you need it kind of be a wholesale change across the English Women's Super League so that it actually takes hold and there's a groundswell of talent coming in from different walks of life. And I think there has to be something done by those with the commercial power to incentivize that as a success metric, because those sports aren't in the same, let's say, bad rut as men's sport are, where they have to just be there to make huge advertising revenue, sell huge subscriptions. What we could actually do for women's sport is benchmark it to say who's currently being left behind and not given opportunities to participate. And why don't we make the benchmark of success participation for that sport and the growth of that sport, so you get the biggest selection, best athletes, and therefore you improve the quality of the overall entertainment product and the performance level of athletes. So I think that's what's exciting to hear, that your sister's engaged in that, but the ecosystem has to show her that it's a
That
good
she can.
viable career for her.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that she can make
Definitely.
something from it. Yeah.
And I think that's been a bit similar with volleyball. You know, it's kind
Mm.
of only of late. You know, I mean, there's been the, like you say, the anomaly of like a few athletes in the beach volleyball world where, you know, they come from a Black or mixed like background. But you know, for me growing up, I didn't really see that so much. There was, you know, there was one of those things where it was always, you could count how many there were playing or competing on one or two hands. You know, at an international level. I mean, of course, you could maybe have participation, and I know like the FIVB, the World Organizing Body for volleyball, always wanted to outreach and grow the sport in across all continents and have
Mm.
this inclusion factor. But, you know, only of late you're seeing like for Qatar, Sheriff and Ahmed, you know, originally from Gambia and Senegal, but
Yeah.
playing for Qatar. Qatar, they're
Guitar.
now currently
Yeah.
number one in the world.
Yeah.
You know, they're showing like the dominating force this season that they are, which is ridiculous. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And, you know, seeing athletes like that for me helps me to kind of keep that motivation of, look, like,
Mm.
it is possible. But I think the biggest challenging factor is in my sport. You know, it's such a big divide in the sense of, to be able to go and compete, to be able to go and train, unless you're in a funded program, a lot of it is financially down to you. And
Yeah.
even if you are in a even if you are in a funded program, they may be just paying for coaches or your travel to
Minimum
events. So it's, yeah,
expenses.
like expenses. And
Yeah.
then the rest of it is you still have to figure out how you're living, what you're doing with your life, and it depends. You know, there are other players who've gone about it different ways. Like I know of American players who used to live out of an RV truck and travel to events, you know, and things like this.
That's a
But
huge sacrifice to make, right? Because you're adapting your whole life, and not everyone's circumstances, depending what kind of family background or caring responsibilities they have, could do that. So I guess
exactly,
from your perspective, with obviously the challenges and all the ways in which you've had in order to stay in participating in a sport where you're largely underrepresented, what are some of the things that you've seen that could maybe be helpful for brands or federations to do to try and remove some of those obstacles? Because obviously funding is one of those, so more money coming into the sport helps with that, but in lieu of that, what other things can be done to help support athletes so that they don't have to make those hard choices about not having a home in order to support their playing careers?
I think it's difficult because you always want to try and find the solutions, and I hear a story about when was it boxing
Yeah,
got funded for 2012, and they like instead of like paying for people to go to places, they kind of bought a house where boxers, when they wanted to come and train, I think in Sheffield, they could
yeah,
stay
yeah. The
there and have that
Sheffield
as their
Sports
base.
Institute. Yeah, yeah. That was the model.
Currently for beach volleyball, we don't have a base like for where
Mm,
all the teams, or like there are realistically four teams that compete internationally, maybe three, and only two of them are in the top 100 in the world.
mhm.
And there isn't a base, like one team bases themselves out of Spain because they have Spanish upbringing and Spanish passports, and then myself and my partner, both from London. We try and be in London as often as we can to train in Crystal Palace, but a big thing is we have to travel away because the climate, because the facilities that we don't have.
Mm,
um so I think it's difficult, like ways in which this could be aided would be, if federations or other companies maybe wanted to help with even like the marketing or the promotion side of the sport or the
yeah,
athletes, like you say about telling the story, because I think these things can also help aid an athlete in other aspects that maybe all of a sudden some companies want to then be involved in the sport and help them on their
sponsorship.
journey.
Mhm.
Or I mean, but even if it's so, it doesn't even have to be sometimes financial gain. Like I've known some athletes who have the company who owns like apartment blocks have
Yeah,
then said, okay, we'll give you this accommodation, or we'll give you this accommodation at like a really like almost half the
it's
price
right.
of what it
Yeah,
is. And
yeah,
then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, you have somewhere to live, you have somewhere where you can be based when you want to come back for training and everything. I think it's, especially with the living costs and today going up, it's
yeah.
it's it's crazy. Whenever I come back home, I'm like, oh man, like costs a lot to be back home.
Yes,
sometimes
it
it's
does. It
sometimes it's
does.
kind of like I'd rather just have my expenses covered and just be
Yeah.
away from home.
I don't blame
um
you. I don't blame you. But
yeah.
yeah, I think it's exactly what you're saying there. It's about us being more creative and thinking about what are the resources that we all have access to, particularly on the commercial side of sport, that we can give to athletes to facilitate. And I think I really love that example that you pulled out there about boxing, because yeah, a lot of, great athletes as a result of that have been able to come through the Olympic program over the years because they have that
Yeah.
base to live in Sheffield, and it wasn't a prohibitive cost factor that they didn't then have somewhere to stay, as they were accessing the best trainers in the country to prepare for the highest level that they could reach. And I think when you look around at other sports, especially yours, I think some of the things that as well people forget is the cost of and the time of traveling, the convenience of all of that. So again, if they was, maybe Uber should offer all of you
I mean,
shout
but
out to
yeah,
anyone from Uber who can make it happen. Free rides for
definitely.
all athletes competing in the Commonwealth Games to help support you get to and from training as you prepare for it. I think that would be awesome. So things like that, like being really creative and very, very intentional about using the resources to say, how do they make athletes' lives bigger or better? And I think definitely you've given me a really great thought about some things we could do here. So thank you for sharing that.
No worries. I think definitely it's something that can be pursued and looked at more and more. And I think you know there are many, and this type of thing where there are probably so many potential athletes who could have been so successful, but potentially they didn't have the right infrastructure around them, or they
Yeah.
didn't have, and even the opportunity, or even potentially even sometimes just somebody being there who's driving them to
Yes, to
want to
and
like
from.
keep pushing,
Yeah. Yeah.
um and I think that's stuff that I would hate to find out, like a young athlete who came from a black household like me, wasn't in a position where financially they were in the strongest position when they were young growing up. I would hate for them to then miss out on an opportunity to go and compete internationally, or to progress their level because of other outside factors like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's
and
just
that's a reality for too many young kids at the moment, I think. But even for when athletes then progress through and they get older, because funding gets harder, as you'll know, as you get
yeah.
older, from streams that fund you, like Sport England. When you reach 18 years on with UK Sport as well, those funding streams dry up. So I think there's also some work to be done around to say what are some of the things you can support athletes of when they are past that sort of, let's say, early teen stage to the early 20s, that
Yeah.
helps see them through, and to think about the platforms you create for them to then be able to generate popularity, which over time we know with the formula of marketing helps attract bigger, better deals that can then over time help pay for those things, to stop them from then having to drop out. Because I've seen sadly too many instances of that over the course of my career, where when I was working a lot in athlete management, you would try to push a lot when there was a kind of like a middle gap to get a deal secured for an athlete. And often the tension was you would even look at deals that were not necessarily going to be great for them long term, but you knew they would at least keep them competing in the sport. And so the trade-off that you had to make was sometimes quite difficult. And definitely, I would say to you that looking at the course of it, athletes from non-white backgrounds, specifically Black backgrounds, were disproportionately more affected by that. And that's something that is obviously incredibly, incredibly difficult, and something you want to stop, because it can then encourage really bad antisocial behavior if they come from the right environment to try and keep themselves funded to play this sport. And so, yeah, I think that's something, again, that looking at social interventions that help support sports performance for people from underrepresented backgrounds because of the barriers are greater, is something that also, we did a lot of great work with. Really proud to say, when we worked a lot on Lucozade and Beats' accounts, and really working with athletes like Anthony Joshua and in his early part of his career, looking at keeping him in boxing through those deals, but also thinking back to the ecosystems of where he came from and how to use that there. Did very similar work with Under Armour in the States with someone like Steph Curry and Dwayne Johnson. Really focused again all around using them, their story, but also the platform that they then had to create ecosystems. And I think today,
I think that's the biggest thing.
He's taken it bigger than the original dream that, the Under Armour team we pitched him with, but he's taken it bigger and has created a whole great ecosystem now that doesn't only just get young Black men at risk into basketball and there's a pathway for success, but actually does now with women's basketball. And it's also great to see that his advocacy for women's sport, particularly Black women in sport, has continued even now when he's, at his highest level. Seeing him at NCAA games over the March Madness period was really great. Great advocacy for that. And when you look at some of the stuff Dwayne Johnson does in really hard to reach neighborhoods around getting people fit and being healthy and just having that sort of helping add to the kind of social upward mobility for them is so important. So I think I always say to people who work in positions where they can affect the trajectory of an athlete, you also have to think about it as, even if it doesn't work out for this athlete to the big dream that we want of the shiny trophy, so we can make all those beautiful emotional Nike ads everyone loves, what can you actually do with the springboard that you create for them, that it becomes almost a change catalyst for the thing that preventing them competing in the first place. So I think that's a good call out.
No, and I think that's just amazing. I think how it's crazy when you think about it. So many of these big successful stories that we see, or so many of these big successful athletes that we see, all start with a story where they really were in a difficult position, or and it's always beautiful to see. But it also, I love seeing these things where it just fires me up. It fires me up to kind of just want to keep pursuing and keep pushing and keep pushing and keep being great. At the end of the day, all you have is sometimes just you and your own voice and your own motivation to say, I'm going to keep pushing, because it's just one right step away from taking you to a completely different level. Totally. And in sport as well, you see it where you all of a sudden, a player, the work that they might put in the off season, you might see it the following year or the year after that, where all of a sudden the massive jump in that next step of maybe sometimes going from junior level to competing at the senior stage, all of a sudden that jump happens and everything changes. And it's just how can we help keep young Black athletes, especially male and female, in the sport long enough for that jump to happen.
Exactly. You want to get them to that starting line, and I think when he thinks about some of the really great work that Lewis Hamilton has started to do around changing motorsport, again, specifically F1's pathway to, that's, if there ever was a sport that actively is like, we don't want Black people here. It's probably
exactly.
and Baba Wallace as well, right, across in the US. there as well, and his category of motor racing. It's kind of everywhere, and you've got a nice shift happening here with W Series, which again is making it easy, because the biggest barrier to entry with a lot of premier motor class motorsport rather, I should say, is the cost. You need a big sponsor, you need a big budget. So something like W Series, what I love about it is that it took all that away. So you just judged on your merit as a driver, you pass the tests, and if you do, you get assigned a team, and they pay for everything. So they pay all your costs of travel, all your engineering costs, your salary as well. So it's a really good platform, as you say, to get people to the starting line, but then also giving them then the ability to not worry about those things. So you can just focus on getting better, which is ultimately what you want to see, because also then it means that the sport itself gets far better and more exciting to look at. So those are great things, and we're hopefully I'll be able to, next time we catch up, share something very exciting that we're looking at in that space.
Definitely, that'll be awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess something then to ask, as a Black person in sport, what are you most looking forward to for the year 2022? Obviously, whatever you can discuss.
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. I think for me, I'm going to answer it more from like a fan perspective. I'm actually really looking forward to seeing more shifts in how we even talk and think about underrepresented people in sport, and how we're challenging commonly accepted narratives in sport. That's what I'm really excited about. I think one of the things that really inspired me in the last 12 months was looking at the great power a Black female athlete like Simone Biles had in changing conversation around mental health and thinking about athlete welfare. So what I'm really excited about is how can we take those wonderful lighthouses that these amazing, incredible human beings like her are lighting in sport, and us as Black people use them as a springboard to affect change in our own areas. And so that hopefully we have this kind of big domino effect to actually get people to shift the conversations and the perceptions around sport to make it easier for Black people to succeed. That's what I'm excited about.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. I like that.
Yeah. How about you? What is your highlight?
I think for me, probably two things for me in my sport as a Black person I'm looking forward to the most with this year. I'm hoping, of course, I want to climb the ladder and be as high as I can in the world, and at some point, hopefully, take over that number one ranking from to other Black athletes from Qatar. But my biggest thing would be, to be able to be in that conversation with them, and this year especially, to have the noise around it all coming to fruition. The media and the marketing and everything kind of being elevated to show two athletes that are underrepresented in the sport really climbing to the top and being at the pinnacle, and hopefully it's a springboard for more athletes like myself from a range of countries to really push on and go further. And then my second one is definitely as long as everything goes to plan, hopefully medaling at the Commonwealth Games, wanting to take gold there, but as a young Black athlete to be able to do it in a city that's seen as one of our most diverse and multicultural cities in Birmingham. I think to be able to really be that driving force behind everything that we're discussing today at our home games, I think that would be an amazing thing for me to kind of be excited about in 2022 as well. Being able to really push and drive and change the image of our sport in general as well. But with an event like as big as the Commonwealth Games in England, so those are two things that 100% my mindset is I want to be able to try and push to be at that level.
Yeah, well, I love it, and I'm gonna enjoy every minute of watching you. So I wish you all the absolute best. Keep shining bright and flying the flag, and I think it's awesome what you're doing with your platform.
Oh, thank you, and likewise with you. If there aren't people like you involved in the sport, a lot of these stories don't get out there.
We're trying. Well, we'll keep showing up and turning up.
That's all we could ask. Thank you.
Amen. Nice to meet you. All the best. Hey, look after yourself.
Likewise.
Wow.